Somehow Palpatine returned.
A few years ago, I made a preview for a review I'm trying to work on long term. That being my continued deconstruction of the Star Wars sequel trilogy and how it's a flaming pile of dog shit. It roughly covers the first 5 minutes of the Rise of Skywalker, focusing on the absurdity of Palpatine's return and how his master plan to destroy all the free worlds to create his perfect empire makes no sense. However, at the end of the video, I brought up something that may come across as obscure for a lot of people. You see, the movie doesn't do anything to explain exactly how Palpatine survived the destruction of the Death Star and the vacuum of space, with Disney trying to hand-wave it away with a 5-second reference to cloning technology.
Dark science. Cloning. Secrets only the Sith knew.
While apparently forgetting the Kaminoans were a thing. In an attempt to address this criticism of the movie, Disney released a novelization of the film, in which they delve into a more thorough, and I'm using that term very loosely, explanation for how Palpatine came back. Of course, I was in no mood to give financial support to the corporate scumbags trying to say that this is supposed to be the true ending to the Star Wars saga, so I looked up information on the novel on YouTube. Eventually, I came across a video by Star Wars Theory reading a page from near the end of the book, explaining how Palpatine survived by transferring his mind to an empty clone he had prepared on Exegol. I could end the video here, and I'm sure no one would be upset with that, as anyone with more than 2 brain cells can figure out how this explanation is bullshit. But, for the sake of argument, let's take a swing at it. So, as Palpatine fell down the shaft, he was able to transfer his mind into a clone body. He was able to do this because he sensed Vader's desire to betray him for years and made a backup plan ahead of time. And in the following years, he would plan his return in secret while continuing to pull the strings. This particular thing is given more insight in Battlefront 2, but if I have to purchase a $60 video game to understand the plot of a movie that would normally cost a $10 movie ticket, you fucked up completely. So, a couple of things about this explanation. You're telling me Palpatine already knew about Anakin's plan to betray him for years and never did anything about that. Why did he never kill him while his guard was down? Yeah, he was testing Luke to see if he would turn to the dark side, but he didn't even know about Luke until sometime during the events of Episode 5. And even at the end of Episode 6, Luke made it clear that he wasn't going to turn. This should have been the moment Palpatine rammed his lightsaber through both Luke and Anakin. Really think back to Return of the Jedi. If Palpatine killed both of them immediately instead of dicking around with his lightning powers, he would have gotten rid of all the opposition that posed a threat. There would be no Jedi left to fight him, and he might have even won. Why keep Anakin around for no reason except to let himself get thrown into the shaft? He can kill Luke and Anakin and then transfer his mind if that's what he was planning to do anyway. Why even keep Anakin around if he was just going to take power for himself? Snoke was a disposable pawn, and he only kept Rey and Kylo around to absorb their essence. If the idea was to immortalize himself, why would he only make 1 clone? Why not make a dozen or 100? And even then, why would he make them empty vessels? Was he planning to transfer his mind 100 times? Also, why would Palpatine transfer his mind into a weak body? Wouldn't he want his clone to be young and strong? Did he seriously plan on transferring himself into a frail body that needs to be constantly hooked on life support to survive? Why would he even do that? That's like a 70-year-old man wanting to live longer and instead transfers his mind into a 90-year-old body. Why transfer his mind into a shitty body that was falling apart? Also, according to the description in the book, they say Palpatine was focusing his mind, calling on all the powers of the dark side to transfer his essence. That's not what he was doing in the movie. He was very clearly shocked and caught off guard when Anakin picked him up and threw him into the shaft. You say he was planning this for years when, according to this facial expression, he was only aware of Anakin's betrayal for 3 seconds, and as he fell, he was yelling in despair, in disbelief that he was betrayed and seconds away from death. He screamed all the way down until the explosion. In what way does that indicate Palpatine was focusing his mind to call on all the powers of the dark side? Does focusing your mind involve yelling at the top of your lungs? I guess I've been doing my meditation classes all wrong. And furthermore, I find it absurd that Palpatine successfully transferred his mind into another planet light years across the galaxy in as little as a few seconds. Like, do you know how long a light year is in length? A lot. A real lot. There is no fucking way Palpatine transferred his mind to Exegol before his body reached that explosion in the shaft. Nothing about this makes a single lick of sense. And I know what you might be thinking. Oh, well, what about the Force Unleashed 2 when Galen Merrick's essence was transferred? Well, 2 things about that. 1, it was only implied. There was no outright confirmation that his essence was transferred. And 2, even if you want to believe Merrick's mind was transferred, Vader didn't start cloning him until the end of the first game. There was a reasonable window in time between Merrick's death and the birth of the clone. It's still stupid, but I have a much easier time believing that. There was more thought and effort put into explaining Merrick's return than Palpatine's. Even going by the technology they use, it makes no sense. Palpatine is shown to have the facial scars he received from fighting Mace Windu. Why does his clone have those facial scars? That's not supposed to be something you can clone. And even then, why would Palpatine want those scars? Does he really think it's more proficient to have a damaged body instead of one that's perfect and free of damage? Everything about him coming back in this movie is just a lazy cop-out. Do you actually believe this was all part of George Lucas's original vision back when he was working on the original 6 movies? Do you really think he was planning the sequel trilogy to be about Palpatine returning decades later through all of these ridiculous means? No, of course not. This was just some random crap Disney came up with in a sad attempt to placate fans. This doesn't do anything to enhance the story. All it amounts to is a ripoff of the Dark Empire story from the EU, which is terrible writing as it further takes away from the finality in Return of the Jedi. Peace wasn't restored to the galaxy. Luke and Anakin didn't defeat the Empire, because apparently Anakin's betrayal was all part of Palpatine's plan. Was there even any guarantee that this was going to work? Yes, Palpatine is a master planner who thinks ahead, but any number of things could have happened to fuck up this plan. Why didn't he just do something less convoluted, like storing his DNA into a chip and implanting it in someone's brain like what the Joker did in Batman Beyond, instead of this stupid-ass cloning facility that can be traced using a wayfinder? And even with all that put to the side, it's a horrible writing decision to bring Palpatine back at all, because it reinstates how the entire franchise was just going around in circles. Palpatine was alive and well the whole time, and now according to Disney, the end of Return of the Jedi was only the end of Phase 1 of his master plan. There's no new conflict, no new threat, no new challenge for the heroes to face. It's the exact same villain we already defeated in the original trilogy. You can't even make the argument this is a new villain by saying this could be a different version of Palpatine. It is literally the exact same guy who should have died 40 years ago but didn't because Disney decided to just bullshit him back to life. No matter what argument you make, no matter what excuse you come up with, this is a god-awful writing decision in every possible sense. Not just because it's a horrible rehash of the original trilogy, but because of what it represents. The fact that Disney has absolutely no problem with retconning 4 decades worth of canon for the sake of a cheap shock moment that ends up having no value because it was already spoiled months before the movie was released in theaters, because Disney wanted to do something specific in a panic, in a desperate attempt to buy back people's trust after what happened with The Last Jedi, and further proving there is no longer any reason to get invested in the Star Wars universe or the characters therein, because Disney, in the most fleeting of whims, will rip out and tear apart everything you loved about them and change them into something completely unrecognizable, to the point that they're no longer consistent with any of the previous storylines in the series that were made while it was still under the ownership of the guy who made the series in the first place, which is completely insulting to people who were already fans of Star Wars long before Disney bought the rights to it, because they want to appeal to this new demographic of stupid shit-eating fuckhead retards who know nothing about Star Wars, because otherwise they would be rightfully angry with all of the god-awful storytelling decisions that Dickhead Johnson and Dickhead Abrams chose to put out, and the hundreds of ways that Disney is openly willing to neuter this franchise in the name of corporate interest and Kathleen Kennedy's stupid female empowerment ideology that has been proven to be extremely damaging to the franchise's profitability, as they take away everything that made Star Wars a unique franchise and just make it into another cash cow for Disney to shamelessly milk money off of, because at this point they're so creatively bankrupt that their only remaining option is to buy out the rest of the industry. And this whole thing with Palpatine being not quite dead and Anakin's sacrifice being rendered moot is only the worst example of this problem. This is something that can be seen throughout the entire sequel trilogy, where they deliberately fuck up all of the accomplishments of the original characters and downplay their importance in service of shoving these new characters down your throat. They did it with Luke, they did it with Leia, they did it with Han Solo, they did it with C-3PO, they did it with Lando, they did it with Chewbacca. Even characters who don't appear in the sequel trilogy are getting fucked over as a result of this massive retcon. Boba Fett, The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, nothing they do ends up mattering because the events of the sequel trilogy will inevitably happen in this timeline. But let's put all that to the side for a moment, because there's still so many ways this twist makes no sense and erases any sense of tension from the story. For example, let's just assume that Palpatine has more clones lingering around somewhere. Now he's pretty much unkillable. He can just come back dozens of times over now that darkside cloning facilities are established to be a thing. It's revealed later in the movie that Palpatine had another clone created to be younger without any scars or injuries, which reinstates my question of why he wouldn't make all of his clones to be like that. But this clone was considered a failure for not having force powers. Then it's revealed that this clone was actually Rey's father, who does get the force. You figure that one out. So why should we believe he's gone forever if you already cheapened his death once? For all we know, Rey could probably be a clone of Palpatine herself. She's already the offspring of a clone, so it could be like a clone within a clone, or I don't know, my brain hurts just trying to make sense out of it. And it just reinstates how much of an idiot they made Palpatine in this movie. Like, he's going to destroy all the free worlds instead of sending troops to occupy them. He's going to waste all those resources for the sake of being evil. He's going to announce his return to the galaxy publicly instead of staying hidden. And you mean to tell me this guy had access to cloning technology and never took advantage of it? Why didn't he clone Darth Vader? He could have sent another Vader to Endor and obliterate the rebels in seconds. And it also shows how hypocritical Disney is to delete the EU and separate it from the main canon, and then immediately proceed to rip off the EU with that stupid cloning idea from Dark Empire. And worse still, they expected us to be okay with the fact we had to pay an additional $20 to gain access to this information that they were too lazy to put into the film. You remember that bullshit Square Enix pulled with Final Fantasy 15, where they split the game into a season pass, additional DLC, and a book because they couldn't wait until the fucking game was actually finished before releasing it to bait you into spending more money on it? That's what this is. This is basically DLC you have to purchase from a third-party source to understand what's going on. It's not like a DVD for a movie where the deleted scene was a concept scrapped from the final product due to creative differences or changes to the script. They meant for this to be the official backstory behind Palpatine's return. Maybe it's possible to create a scenario where Palpatine survived the events of Episode 6, but definitely not the way Disney did it. It might have been one thing if the movie took the time to give us some kind of proper explanation besides that horrible hand wave from a random background character. No. Instead, they say, somehow, and expected us to not ask questions and just accept this horrible writing, and had the fucking nerve to say, give us more money if you want answers to these questions. Imagine living in a world where there are living, breathing human beings who still defend this bullshit.
Remember the mantra.
Loyalty to Disney. Loyalty to the brand. Loyalty is salvation. Loyalty is life.